Welcome back to Sustainable Finance. This is part 7 of the course, and over the next few videos, we turn to a sector that sits right at the front line of climate change: insurance. My name is Gregor Weiss, and I hold the chair in sustainable banking here in Leipzig. In this first video, we lay the foundations. We ask what insurance actually is as a business, and we see why sustainability is not a side issue for insurers, but something that touches the very core of what they do. Just to place us in the bigger picture, this is topic 7 of 12. So far, we have looked at responsible investing, at corporate social responsibility and how to measure it, at sustainability reporting and ESG ratings, and at sustainable banking. Insurance is in many ways the natural next step after banking, because insurers, like banks, are financial intermediaries, but they manage risk in a very particular way. After this, we will move on to sustainable investments. And asset management. And let me stress right away why insurance deserves a whole chapter of its own. This is not a niche corner of finance. Global insurance premiums run to well over $7 trillion a year, and the industry sits on investment portfolios worth tens of trillions, making insurers, collectively, one of the largest owners of assets on the planet. So whatever insurers decide to do about climate change matters twice over. Once for the millions of households and businesses they protect, and once for the vast pools of capital they invest. Few institutions sit closer to the intersection of finance and sustainability. Let me tell you what you should be able to do by the end of this chapter. First, you should be able to explain the business of insurance, how risk pooling and reserving work, and understand the insurer's dual role, both as a carrier of risk and as one of the largest investors in the economy. Second, you should be able to distinguish the three main types of climate-related risk for insurers: physical risk, transition risk, and liability or litigation risk. Third, you should understand the so-called protection gap and why climate change is making some risks effectively uninsurable. Fourth, you should be able to survey the regulation and the frameworks that shape sustainable insurance. Things like Solvency II, the supervisor's EIOPA and IAIS, and the United Nations Principles for Sustainable Insurance. And finally, you should know the key instruments: reinsurance, catastrophe bonds, parametric and green products, together with the empirical evidence on how well they work. To keep us focused, 3 questions run through this whole chapter. First, how does the insurance business actually work? And where does sustainability enter the picture? Second, why are climate risks becoming harder and in some places impossible to insure? And third, how do insurers price, share, and regulate climate and ESG risk? Hold on to these 3 questions. By the end of part 7, you should be able to answer each of them confidently. Notice how they build on one another. You can't understand why climate risk is becoming uninsurable until you understand how insurance normally works. And you can't judge the regulation until you see what problem it's trying to fix. So we'll move deliberately from the mechanics to the stress climate change puts on them to the policy response. Let's begin with part A, the business of insurance and sustainability. Before we can talk about climate risk or green products, we need to be clear on what insurance is and how insurers make money. So this first part is really the groundwork for everything that follows. At its heart, insurance is a beautifully simple idea. It works in 4 steps. First, premiums come in. Many clients each pay a relatively small premium. Second, risk pooling. The insurer spreads that risk across a large pool of policyholders. Because losses are, for most people, rare and independent, the average loss across the whole pool is far more predictable than the loss for any single person. Third, and this part is often forgotten, the insurer invests the float. The premiums collected today are held as reserves and invested in capital markets until they are needed. And fourth, claims go out. The insurer pays the few clients who actually suffer a loss. So money flows in from the many and out to the unlucky few. And in between, the insurer is a large investor. Keep that in-between step in mind because it turns out to be crucial for sustainability. Let me dwell on that float for a moment because it's the part students most often overlook. There is a gap in time, sometimes years, sometimes decades, between when the premium comes in and when the claim goes out. In the meantime, the insurer holds and invests that money. Warren Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway largely on this insight. Insurance float is, in effect, money you get to invest before you have to pay it back. For a life insurer, where policies can run for 40 or 50 years, that float is enormous and long-lived. And that is exactly why an insurer's investment choices, what it does with the float, are every bit as important for sustainability as the policies it writes. Now, insurance is not one single business. It splits into two very different worlds. On one side, we have life insurance. Life contracts are long-term, often running for decades. The risks are predictable and slow-moving. Essentially, how long people live, longevity and mortality. Because the money is tied up for so long, life insurers build up very large investment portfolios. On the other side, we have non-life insurance, also called property and casualty, or P&C. Here, contracts are short-term, usually renewed each year, and the risks are diverse and volatile. This is the world of catastrophes, low probability, high-impact events like hurricanes and floods. And precisely because of those catastrophes, non-life insurers rely heavily on reinsurance, which we will come to shortly. For our purposes, remember this: life insurers matter most as investors, while non-life insurers are where climate catastrophe risk really bites. It's worth seeing why that split maps so neatly onto our two climate risks. Because life insurers hold huge, decades-long portfolios, their main climate exposure is on the asset side. The transition risk of holding, say, fossil fuel bonds that lose value as the world decarbonizes. Non-life insurers, by contrast, feel climate change directly on the liability side, through the claims they pay after every storm, flood, and wildfire. So as we go through this chapter, keep asking yourself, is this a life insurance problem sitting on the investment portfolio, or a non-life problem arriving through the claims? The answer usually tells you which risk we're dealing with. This brings us to one of the most important ideas in the whole chapter. Insurers have two balance sheets and therefore two roles. On the liability side, the insurer is an underwriter. It carries its clients' risks. As the climate changes, claims and losses go up. That is the direct hit. But the underwriter also has power. Through its pricing and the cover it offers, it can steer behavior. Its impact on the world comes from what it chooses to insure. On the asset side, the same company is an investor, in fact, one of the largest institutional investors on the planet, holding bonds, equities, and real estate. That means it is exposed to transition risk and to stranded assets. Think of a portfolio full of fossil fuel bonds. And here its impact comes from where it invests the float. So the insurer shapes the economy twice, once through what it insures and once through where it invests. Let me make the scale of that second role tangible. Europe's insurers alone manage on the order of 10 trillion euros of assets. A single large group like Allianz invests well over €1 trillion. When an institution of that size decides to tilt its portfolio away from coal, or to demand climate disclosures from the companies whose bonds it buys, that decision moves real money and sends a real signal through the market. This is the point I most want you to take from this slide. An insurer is never just a passive victim of climate risk. Through both its underwriting pen and its investment book, it is an active force shaping how fast or how slowly the real economy decarbonizes. Now we can connect this to a concept you already know from earlier in the course: double materiality. For insurers, double materiality applies on both balance sheets at once. There is the financial outside-in direction. Climate and ESG risks raise claims and damage investments. The world affects the insurer. And there is the impact, inside-out direction. The insurer's underwriting and investment decisions shape the real economy's emissions. The insurer affects the world. And there is one more affects the world. And there is one more thing that makes insurers special. Because their entire business is to price risk, they tend to see climate change before the rest of us do. When your job is to put a number on the chance of a flood or a wildfire, you notice when that number starts to move. Insurers are, in a sense, the economy's early warning system for climate risk. And here's why that matters far beyond the insurance industry itself. When an insurer raises premiums sharply in a coastal town or quietly stops offering cover there, it is broadcasting a price signal about climate risk that everyone else, home buyers, banks, local governments, can read. In that sense, insurers translate the abstract, distant threat of climate change into a very concrete number on an annual bill. That's a theme we'll return to again and again in this chapter. Insurance is often where climate change first shows up as hard financial reality. Let's make that concrete with a real example. On this slide, you can see a materiality matrix from AXA, one of the world's largest insurers. A materiality matrix is simply a tool that maps the issues a company faces. Typically, one axis shows how important each issue is to the company's own business, and the other shows how important it is to its stakeholders: customers, regulators, investors, society. The issues that score high on both axes, the top right corner, are the ones the company treats as most material and reports on in most detail. For an insurer like AXA, climate change sits firmly in that top right corner. This is not a public relations exercise. It is a structured way of deciding where sustainability genuinely intersects with the business, and it feeds directly into strategy and disclosure. And this connects straight back to part 5 of the course on sustainability reporting. Remember the idea of double materiality that underpins the European Union's reporting rules? A materiality matrix like this one is, in effect, an insurer working out its double materiality in practice, deciding which issues are financially material to the company and which reflect the company's material impact on society and the environment. So when you see AXA place climate change in the top right corner, you're watching the abstract principle from part 5 turn into a concrete strategic priority for a real, very large insurer. Let's pull this first video together. Insurance works by pooling risk from many clients, investing the reserves, the float, and paying out to the few who suffer losses. Because of that float, every insurer is both an underwriter and a major investor. Two balance sheets, two roles, two channels of impact. Double materiality applies to both, and since insurers price risk for a living, they often see climate change coming before anyone else. In the next video, we zoom in on the single biggest source of physical risk for insurers: catastrophes. We will see why catastrophe losses are so different from ordinary losses, why they are rising, and why climate change is quietly rewriting the models insurers depend on. I'll see you there.